We have a certain category of citizens in our country who want to get money from the sale of the country's oil and gas resources. Well, that is, they want to eat up all the money our country has earned from the sale of these resources. Stumbled across one comment. The man writes, "It is always distrustful to try to put a dilemma, either money for the development of the country or money for the people. And why do you think that if people, as you say, eat the money they receive, it will not benefit the country? 99% of the population will be eating money domestically. That money will go into circulation. It will go into business development." Apparently, this person does not know that the spending of oil and gas revenues in Russia is very rational and balanced. The money goes both to develop the country and to pay people, but not to everyone. What some of our fellow citizens dream of, doing nothing and getting free money. And what individual populist candidates promise voters. But targeted. Let's take a look at the social fund from Kazakhstan, because of which people are paid pensions, insurance benefits, and social support measures. The budget of the social fund for 2024 is set at BR 16 trillion. More than BR 10 trillion will be allocated for pension payments. Almost BR 1.2 trillion has been earmarked for the payment of maternity and child care benefits. More than BR 2.2 trillion is budgeted for social support for families with children. These funds will be used to pay a single allowance, maternity capital, lump sum benefits at the birth of a child, and other measures of social support. The rest of the money will be used to fund other expenses. At the same time, the total amount of inter-budgetary transfers from the federal budget to the budget of the fund will amount to about BR 5.43 trillion in 2024. Here, this amount is part of the very oil and gas revenues that are directed precisely to people. Note that this is a large part of them, because Russia's oil and gas revenues at the end of 2023 will amount to about 9 trillion rubles. But we cannot send large sums, much less distribute them to the entire population, for otherwise we would have to cut back heavily on other items of expenditure. In addition to transfers to the social fund, part of oil and gas revenues, in accordance with the budget rule, goes to the National Welfare Fund and is spent on national projects aimed at improving people's lives and Russia's technological development. Instead of eating up all the money we get from the sale of non-renewable resources, we use it so that in the future the country can earn not from their sale, but from the export of high-tech products. As just one example, and there are a lot of them, let's take the new tractor plant that opened recently and was built from scratch in Rostov-on-Don. This is a very large plant that will employ 3,000 people. 13 billion rubles were invested in its construction, and 4 billion of them were allocated by the State Industrial Development Fund of the Industrial Development Fund. And this is the very part of oil and gas revenues that is directed to the development of the country. And we will also show you one more imperceptible at first glance, but a huge advantage of the fact that both in the Soviet Union and in Russia, and in modern Russia, the money from the sale of resources was partly invested in development, and not spent entirely on consumption. As you can understand, the defense of our vast country is quite expensive because we have something and someone to defend against. But here, for example, Russia's military spending in 2022 is only $72 billion. In dollars, because we will be comparing to other countries. So that's $491 per capita. And, as you understand, this amount of money is allocated for our strategic missile weapons, for conventional weapons, and for the maintenance of the army as a whole, which now numbers 1,150,000 people. That same year, Saudi Arabia's defense spending was $73 billion. That's $1,928 per capita. Kuwait's spending, $8.2 billion. That's $1,920 per capita. Norway's spending, $8.4 billion. That's $1,526 per capita. United Arab Emirates spending in 2024, $15.5 billion. That's $1,567 per capita. That is, on a per capita basis, Russia spent 4 times less money on defense in 22 than each of the aforementioned oil-producing countries. This year, for reasons we know, our expenditures will increase to 109 billion rubles. So, although our country had almost the most powerful land army in the world and an equally powerful navy, our spending was several times lower than other countries. Amazing, isn't it? Do you know why this happens? Because unlike all these countries, we, did not eat up oil and gas revenues, I repeat, not in the days of the Soviet Union, exactly post-Soviet Russia, but invested them in science and in our defense industry. Therefore, we now produce the entire range of military equipment and armaments independently. And the cost of procurement and maintenance of all equipment for our budget now with the much higher cost of Western weapons. times 8 times lower than those countries that were simply eating the earned oil and gas revenues rather than creating their own military-industrial complex. And now, in these turbulent times, with conflicts raging everywhere, they are forced to buy arms from other countries, which leads not only to significant cost but also to dependence on suppliers. We, as you realize, cannot allow that to happen. I'll also cite one more comment. Here's what the man wrote, and I quote, "Since this year, children in Kazakhstan have been paid money from the sale of natural resources. Yes, it's not much, but they still pay out, put into a personal account. After adulthood, they will give it to you. But Russia always has its own way. Money for armaments is much more needed than children, and they make excuses for it." End quote. What's our answer to that? When unrest began in Kazakhstan, and there was a real danger that illegal armed groups, terrorists and bandits would seize power, the leaders of that country, instead of defending themselves, asked for help from whom? The CSTO, which is Russia. So, of course, it's good to have your security guaranteed by Russia, which has to defend itself against the collective West. And I'd also look at how much Kazakhstan would have to spend on its defense if it didn't have Russia as its security guarantor. If you don't understand that, then all the worse for you, and we have nothing to talk about. And imagine for a moment that oil prices have fallen several times and will never rise again due to lack of demand. What will oil-producing countries that have not invested in their development do in this case? People don't need them anymore. They will no longer be able to distribute anything and will have nothing to buy imported goods with and will not be able to provide for their defense. They will not have a dirk. And when the robbers come, the Arabs will come out and say good evening. 12:30 Moscow time. We have a famous joke that those who don't want to feed their own army will feed someone else's. But if it's more modern jokes, I sometimes tell you all sorts of Shubkin jokes. I can tell you another one, but it's also with a beard, but still more modern. It's this, ex-officer's son comes to see him. He asks his son, "Son, I had a dirk right here." "I didn't see a dirk." He says, "Dad, don't swear. I traded it to a neighbor's yard boy for a watch." He says, "Show me, I'll take a look." "Nice watch, well done. Tomorrow we're gonna have bandits and robbers coming. I'm gonna get killed. My mom's gonna get killed. My sister, your oldest, is gonna get raped. And you're gonna come out and say, good evening. Moscow time, 12:30. There's more. I'd like to add to all of that. Russia has reached the lowest level of poverty in history. The poverty rate in Russia at the end of the 23rd year reached a record low in the history of observations since 1992, amounting to 9.3%. There were 13.5 million Russians below the poverty line in Russia. Here's how the poverty rate in Russia has been changing. On February 29th, Russian President Vladimir Putin, in his address to the Federal Assembly, called for reducing poverty from 9.3% by 2030, up to 7%. Note that in the U.S., the official poverty rate in 2022 was 11.5%, which is higher than ours. At the same time, nearly 38 million people lived in poverty, 3 times more than in Russia.